So we're going to switch our attention now to Son Heung-Min at Tottenham. James, you're writing a piece about him. For years at Spurs, he's been their go-to guy. It's been a tough run for Ange Postecoglou and for Tottenham. Probably a period where you'd expect them to lean on their top players, but it's gone the other way for Son a little bit. What's gone wrong?
Yeah, it's been really significant, I think, that during this difficult period where the manager's come under a lot of pressure, the fans are obviously turning up their protests towards the board, that, Postecoglou's spoken in a lot of press conferences about wanting his senior men to step up. He named Sonny as captain after Harry Kane and Hugo Lloris left. And while everybody you talk to around the training ground at the club sort of says he's still that guy who sets the standards for the younger players, and he's been sort of, taking on the responsibility, off the field. On the field, we've not really seen it. He's been a subdued version of Sonny, really. And as part of this piece, I've been speaking to some of the Korean journalists who know him really well, and one sort of said to me, it's not the fact that he's not scoring that's the problem; it's the fact that he's not smiling. And he does seem to have taken the difficulties that Spurs have suffered this season really to heart, and you kind of see him carrying that responsibility, and it just seems to have dulled his impact this season.
Mark, I mean, it can be quite a difficult thing to manage for clubs, can't it? When you've got players who have been outstanding servants to clubs, they've scored a lot of goals, that they've turned in fantastic performances, but then they start coming towards the end of their careers. How you manage that, and how, I don't know, I suppose, are you still relying on them? Are you trying to phase them out a little bit? Do they need replaced? I mean, we see this with top clubs all over the world, don't we? It's happening, I suppose, a little bit with Kevin De Bruyne at Man City. What have you seen of Son and Spurs, and how do you think that situation is going to play out?
Well, I mean, I'm just looking at his stats now. Going into the City game on Wednesday, 10 goals and 10 assists in 35 games in all competitions. So it's not that bad. It really isn't. And, I think the comparison to most salaries, obviously, is credible because of the very kind of small gap between the dates of birth. But, if Son was playing for Liverpool in that team, I'd imagine his numbers would be pretty good as well. They might not be Salah levels, but I think they'd be pretty good. So I think Son has been an absolute credit for Tottenham. I do think that, obviously, it's closer to the end of his career than the start of it. But I do think that you can never question his commitment, his quality. And if he's not quite at the top level as he was before, he's had injuries in recent seasons. I just think it's hard to question Son because of what he's given to Tottenham. In what has been, 10 years of well, for the first 5 years was kind of knocking on the door of success, and then the last 5 years has been missing out on any kind of success. But I think he's been a great player for Tottenham. And I do think that his season this year is probably because the team's been struggling so much, and it must be hard to play in that team at times. But great player. For me, he's probably deserved to play for a bigger club than Tottenham for his feats at the club over the recent seasons. He's never quite made the move, but I don't think anybody at Tottenham can question his contribution.
Well, make no mistake, he is a Tottenham legend. No matter what happens to him from here on, he is a Tottenham icon. And I think the biggest thing that people want for him now is to have a trophy to, mark that decade of service at the club. It's the one thing missing. He's been part of one of the most prolific, in fact, the most prolific partnership in Premier League history with Harry Kane. And I do think that's part of the problem here, is that, we sort of talk about the impact of, on Tottenham of losing Kane. Well, nobody would feel that more than Sonny, because those two, they were absolute brothers in arms, and I mean they lived very close to each other. It extended way off the field. They lived about 2 minutes apart. So, whenever Sonny would leave his car at the training ground, Harry Kane would give him a lift home. They were very, very close on and off the field, and I don't think he's been able to replicate that relationship with anyone else. If you think about Dominic Solanke's come in this season, done okay, but he's had injuries, not been consistent. Richarlison's never been able to stay fit for more than a handful of games at a time, and he's not a centre forward. This is the other thing. People sort of talk about, is he better on the left? Is he better through the middle? You talk to most people who know him as well, that sort of say actually he prefers to play out on the left. He's better out on the left, and sometimes when he's asked to play through the middle, it sort of compromises his game a little bit. One of the other things I wanted to bring up when we talk about stats is, as part of this piece, we were looking into his sprints and his distances covered in matches. And I think this is quite significant, that in terms of sprints per game, he averages about 19 per game in the 3 or 4 seasons before Postecoglou turned up. So it was about 19 per game. And in Postecoglou's first full season, he was averaging 24.5 sprints a game. So that's more than 5 more a game every game. And that's obviously reflective of not just the intensity that Postecoglou's asking his front players to press with, but also you're asking a 32-year-old now to go and do that 3 days a week, 3 times a week, every 3 days for 3 months, as it's been in that really difficult period during the season. And I think he's starting at 32, even though he's the absolute model professional, he's starting to show signs of fatigue and not being able to do that, which is no disrespect to him, no blame assigned to him, really. It's just, we were just talking before we started recording about the comparison with Salah, weren't we? About what Salah's asked to do off the ball. You were at the Manchester City-Liverpool game the other day.
Well, yeah, and it's noticeable that Salah isn't asked to do an awful lot off the ball. And that's not to say that he's being lazy, but Liverpool play in a way that allows him to kind of stand out on the wing, not do an awful lot going towards his own goal, because Liverpool know that if you can get him the ball in space, that he's going to be able to hurt the opposition and you'll benefit from that. And it's very rare that you're going to find an opposition fullback motoring past Mo Salah, because in the back of his mind he's thinking, well, in 2 seconds he could be going the other way and I'm going to have to chase him all the way back. If you're planning to play Liverpool, you're focusing on how to stop Mo Salah, aren't you, basically? And if Son is being asked to play in a different way and do an awful lot of work off the ball and all these added sprints because of the way that Ange Postecoglou wants to play, the comparison isn't really fair. And I know that they're sort of, in terms of age, are very, very similar. In terms of the position they play, are very, very similar. But actually, they're being asked to play 2 entirely different games almost.
That's the point, isn't it? I mean, the point you're making there is right about playing for Ange Postecoglou's team. How many of those sprints are going in the right direction, or how many are going in the wrong direction towards, his own goal and having to help the team defend? Because Postecoglou's teams do require a lot of sprinting back to help cover, and I think that doesn't help Son. I think ideally he'd probably have found a coach or a club that would have suited his game a little bit more, but that's just the situation, isn't it? With Tottenham, he's in a team that doesn't quite suit where he is right now. But I think one thing I wanted to add just before we kind of go on to that other issues is that I was speaking to somebody probably about 6-7 years now about signing forwards from Germany. And within the Premier League, there was this view that maybe that in the last 10 years, it's been harder to get players to succeed. And obviously, Erling Haaland came from Borussia Dortmund and was as a sensation as he would be, because that's, he's such an incredible player. But attacking players from Germany find it really hard to settle in the Premier League. And it's the intensity is the issue, the amount of games they have to play. They find the workload hard. And 2 players that were mentioned to me as struggling to make that adjustment were Shinji Kagawa at Man United and Henrik Mkhitaryan at United and Arsenal. Roberto Firmino struggled really bad in his early days at Liverpool. But Son has been, pretty much from day one, a top player at Tottenham. So he's made that transition that a lot of players find it so difficult to do. And I think you have to give him credit for that as well. And, 10 years of being an absolute star performer for Tottenham is why we're talking about him now, because he's been so good. His success in the past is why we're asking the question now, really.
James, I mean, we've spoken a lot about Son on the pitch. You're at Tottenham sort of most weeks. In terms of his impact off the pitch, I mean, I know from personal experience, having been in a lot of City press conferences, that the minute that Erling Haaland signed for City, there was 2 or 3 Norwegian journalists who came and based themselves in Manchester simply to ask questions and report on Erling Haaland. And a situation where, kind of in press conferences, the mic gets passed to the Norwegian journalist and Pep goes straight away, "It's Erling, isn't it?" And everyone kind of laughs. But it's even bigger for Son and the kind of the following that he's got in South Korea. Yeah,
as you say, there are journalists who are dedicated to covering him at Tottenham, but also the impact that he has on the fan base in Korea is astonishing. I mean, again, when Park Ji-sung was at Manchester United, the view apparently there is that Man United were probably the most popular team in Korea because of Park. It's now Tottenham, because of one guy. And look, I mean, I'm up at the Tottenham training ground fairly regularly, and every single time, without fail, there are anywhere between 30, 40 to maybe 100, 120 people who are all holding Son shirts, Son banners. They want one man. They're only interested in Sonny. And more often than not, he goes down, he spends some time with them, he takes selfies, he signs autographs, all that kind of stuff. And we're talking about a guy who's been there for 9, going on 10 years. It's not a new signing. And still the people come, and it is astonishing what he has to, the scrutiny that he's under all the time.
Just ask you on Son. Over the years, people talk about Harry Kane and the impact that he had at Tottenham, and people credit Christian Eriksen's part in that, Dele Alli's part in that. But for me, Son has been the absolute number one part of Harry Kane's success at Tottenham when they were there. The partnership was incredible in terms of the goals together and the assists together. And just to explain how big a part it was in Harry Kane's career.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a period under Jose Mourinho where, and actually with Antonio Conte to some extent, where Spurs were quite defensive minded. They were quite sort of constrained. They were quite constricted as a team. And yet Son and Kane were just outperforming their numbers. I know we sort of debate about XG and how sort of significant it is, but, as an indicator, they were both of them were miles ahead of their XG in terms of the goals and the assists that they were delivering for Tottenham during that period. And yeah, I mean, look, I don't think certainly Harry Kane wouldn't have the goal record that he has at Tottenham without Sonny. And I thought, it was a really nice moment actually when you saw Harry Kane come back to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium with Bayern Munich for the pre-season friendly, and he's in the tunnel and he's sort of shaking hands with pretty much everybody because of course he knows everybody. But then he catches Sonny's eye and they have this moment where they sort of they embrace, and Sonny just lays his head very gently on Harry Kane's chest near his heart, and it's just you can tell, you can't fake that. They genuinely have that affinity and that understanding that it's just very difficult to replicate at any club.
Can I just ask then that Spurs obviously got to a Champions League final with a really fantastic team. You talk about Vertonghen, Alderweireld, Kane, Son, Dele Alli, Eric Dyer. Son would be the last one of those to leave. I mean, does it feel like I know that he's had his contract extended, hasn't he? So he's going to be there till 2026, I think.
Yeah.
Once he finally does leave, which feels closer than ever now, will it feel like the end of an era? And what will that do to kind of Spurs fans?
Yeah, it absolutely will feel like an end of an era, completely. And I think there are a lot of Spurs fans who can't really countenance life without Son and Kane. It's hard enough losing Kane, to lose Son as well in the space of what could be a couple of years. And the other players you've mentioned, that sort of Pochettino team that felt as though it was one step away from conquering the world, but never quite climbed the mountain. It leaves probably everybody with a quite uncertain future, because as much as we're debating Sonny and whether he's still at that absolute peak level, he remains, a guy who more often than not, every fan that goes to that stadium will be expecting to see something from him. And I don't think they feel the same way yet about the others. Brennan Johnson's, looking good under Postecoglou's team, under Postecoglou's management. Same with Solanke, but again, they're not proven over year at the highest level. Maddison, again, you'd say on his day, very, very good, not consistent. Sonny, as we've talked about, has done it year after year. And on the contract thing, I think that is a significant factor too, because we're talking about, I don't think any of us here are sort of suggesting that Sonny's levels have dropped because of a lack of application or a lack of hunger or anything that he's doing. It's it could just be the passage of time, it could be tactical, it could be the collective sort of wider malaise of the team that's affecting him to some extent. But I know that there was some disappointment from the players' camp that Spurs didn't negotiate or even attempt to negotiate a fresh contract. They just essentially said to him, look, there's an option for a further year, we're going to trigger it. It's our option, we retain the right. We know you don't want to go anywhere, we don't want to lose you, we're just going to kick this essentially down the road for a year. That option then got triggered. And so the conversation about maybe him going this summer has obviously been removed. But there is a debate to be had about, the benefit of a player like that having the additional motivation of knowing he's going to play for his future. Now, I'm not sure it really applies to Son, because I think he's so dedicated and so diligent and thoughtful anyway about his football that, to sort of say, oh, well, we're going to dangle this carrot of a contract in front of you to give you an extra 5 or 10%. But again, if we're comparing him to Salah, we could argue that maybe that's going on to some extent with Mohamed Salah. And there is a suggestion, of course, that some players are incentivized in that way. I suppose if Spurs can save some money for a year, then they would do that as well. That I'm sure is part of it. But I do think, when we're talking about the loyalty and what Sonny's given to Spurs, the fact that he wasn't offered a contract, I think did create a little bit of needle.
Well, Mark, can I just ask you, Dan? We've spoken on this podcast before about big clubs and moving on from big players. When's the right time? If you were Spurs, you've triggered his 1 year option. He's under contract now till 2026. What would you do? Would you want to renegotiate? Do you think the time is right for him to move on? Is it now? Is it in a year? What would you do if you were Daniel Levy and Spurs?
Well, like I said, looking at his numbers earlier on, I don't think they're that bad. I think 10 goals and 10 assists and a difficult season. I think that's pretty good. And I think he's obviously an absolutely consummate professional, great athlete, looks after himself. I don't think there's any problems with how he prepares for the game. I think if you're Tottenham, I think you would definitely look to extend it. But I think the flip side is if you're Son Heung-Min, I'm not sure whether I'd just fancy a chance of, he's looking at, I know Harry Kane is the same age. I think they might be about the same age, but I think Harry Kane's taking his chance to go to Bayern Munich and try and win something, and it looks like he'll win something this year. I think Son Heung-Min has earned the right to go somewhere and win something. And, listen, we're putting 2 and 2 together and getting 5 here, but if Mo Salah leaves Liverpool and becomes, decides to move on, Son would be a great replacement at Anfield for a year, because for me, is the best kind of forward that Liverpool never had. That he would have been a perfect player in the Jurgen Klopp team, and even the same under Arne Slot. I think he deserved the right to go to a top club. And Spurs are a big club, but with due respect, they don't win trophies. And I think he's deserved the right now to go to a top club and win a trophy somewhere else. So the question might be whether Spurs have left it too late to keep him, because he's worth more to Tottenham than Spurs are probably worth to Son, which might be hard to take, but he's definitely got 2 or 3 more years in him, definitely.
Does he get that move, do you think? Does he get a move to a club that are challenging for trophies?
Well, he'd have to. I can't see Daniel Levy and Tottenham ever selling to another Premier League club. Look, there was Saudi interest in him, and we reported it season before last, I think it was. And obviously mega money on offer, and he had no interest in going there. You talk to the Korean journalists who know him well, and they always say the one thing he never talks about is where he might end his career, his future. He just does not get into any kind of speculation about that. So there's not a sort of fixed point on the horizon where he sort of said, like, I want to play to this tournament, or I want to go and try this country, or I want to go to this league, or whatever. There's nothing that he's ever made public about that. And all I come back to really is what I'm told time and again is that what he wants more than anything else is to win a trophy with Spurs. Now, that doesn't look likely. They've obviously only got the Europa League to do it, but I think the idea of Sonny and Spurs parting company will be a lot more palatable to both sides if they win a trophy, either this season or next season.
If he doesn't, though, is he the type in the summer with a year left on his contract to say, I've given you 9+ years, I've not won anything, I know I've got a year left on my contract, but the time is right for me to go and find a trophy somewhere? Is he the type of character and personality, do you think?
No, not naturally, but it depends how agitated he was by not being offered a new deal.
Yeah.
And that we'll only learn in the fullness of time. But he's not naturally somebody who goes and knocks on the manager's door and complains about little things, let alone saying, I want to leave a club, I've been here for 10 years. So it would take a lot, I think, for him to agitate for that move. Now, whether Spurs decide, if say the Saudi money came back in the summer and they thought, well, actually, we want to use that money to then rebuild, that's a question they'd have to answer. I don't think they'd want to lose him this summer, because I think also they've not got a lot of leaders in that squad. It's quite a young group. They've been playing for weeks and weeks with 2 teenagers in their starting lineup. A lot of inexperienced players who are yet to sort of peak in the sort of natural evolution of a player's career. So losing Son in that regard would also be a big blow to them.
But it feels as though if you were Son, that a trophy is as far away from as ever now. That he reached the Champions League final with Tottenham, finished second in the Premier League twice. I think this season they're probably going to finish in the bottom half of the Premier League table, unless they win the Europa League, which is possible, but is a long shot. That he may look in the summer and think, I'm as far away as I ever have been to win a trophy.
He may well look at it like that, but what's interesting, I think, is whether Son Heung-Min or Ange Postecoglou at the start of the season would have looked at the Europa League and thought, that's not a priority. It is the thing that binds them both together now, because Postecoglou, I'm not saying he needs to win a trophy to save his job, but my God, it would help. And equally, if Sonny wants that trophy after 10 years, the only one available to him now is the Europa League, and it would mean absolutely everything to that club if they were able to win it. And the only thing you can say in their favour in that regard is that the momentum is at least with them. They've rode out the difficult period in the league while they were still doing okay in the Europa League. Obviously qualified automatically, didn't have to go through the playoff rounds. They're starting to get players back. You know, for that tie, they may well have Van der Ven and Romero back, which is their first choice centre-back pairing. Other players are coming back. We've seen Johnson come back to the first team. Solanke's not too far away. You know, you are looking at a team that could peak at the right time to go and have a real crack at that Europa League, bearing in mind that the strength and depth in the competition is not really there either, which also obviously plays into their hands.
Just on that, me and Mark were covering United under Jose 2017, where they weren't, I mean, their league form wasn't as bad as Spurs is now, but they were sort of bouncing around 6th and 7th in the league. And Mourinho ended up throwing away the league games, didn't he? Resting players and playing young players in big league games against Arsenal, simply to prepare for Europa League ties and ultimately win the trophy.
It's a high-risk strategy, though, isn't it? Because I remember the semi-final against Celta Vigo. They were basically one John Guidetti chance away from getting knocked out, and that would have been everything, all the eggs in one basket scenario. So, but I mean, that's all that Tottenham are left with, isn't it? I mean, like, they're not going to finish anywhere near the European positions of the league. They're so far down now that the Europa League, for them and United, is the only way they can save the season. I know United can win the FA Cup, but it's not the same. The Champions League is the massive, massive carrot at the end of the Europa League situation. I think Tottenham are favourites. I know Andrew was asked about this at a press conference last week, and he was kind of smiling about it. But you got to look at Tottenham. If they can get the players back fit, which they are doing gradually, they have got the ability to win that tournament. So, I mean, I remember Spurs winning the UEFA Cup back in the 80s. So they have got a tradition of winning European trophies, and what a way to kind of get that first trophy in such a long time by winning a European trophy and getting back into the Champions League. I think it's possible. I think with a player like Son, they've got one of the most dangerous strikes in the forwards in the competition. So it's definitely something I think that Spurs could do better or easier than Man United. But again, it's a high-risk strategy to put all your eggs in that basket.